So your area is locked down. So it's done for a few reasons. One, so, we can now call it a secure area. I don't know if the outer perimeter, like where that guy was on the roof, was locked down. Let's get down to brass tacks. I served as a detective with the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office, and in my duties, I worked in the intelligence section, the criminal intelligence section, was rooting out public corruption and mainly task forces. So I was assigned to a Secret Service task force. So what I'm telling you from experience, from being around those guys and from actually taking part in not only the planning of the dignitary protective event, but just I can give you the bird's eye view of what happens in one of these things. And I don't want you to think that I'm the expert. Like if you want to listen to an actual U.S. Secret Service agent or a U.S. Secret Service expert, listen to Dan Bongino. He's still got his finger on the pulse. He knows a lot of people over there. I don't. I'm just basing this on my experience from a very long time ago. I can tell you what went into a dignitary protective event. I can explain a few things that may have happened along the way. I just want to go over that because all I see when a major catastrophic event happens like this, whether it's President Trump's attempted assassination and, God bless him, and I'm glad that he is okay. All we want to do is shift the blame for some reason. We want to look for blame. We never necessarily blame the guy behind the trigger, by the way. We always blame the people that didn't stop them quick enough. I'm not trying to change your mind. I'm not trying to argue with anybody because what I know is what I know. You're not going to argue. We can debate facts. So here are some of the points that I want to talk about. Right-wing influencers all of a sudden have jumped on this bandwagon of, first of all, how could they let this happen? And then second of all, what's a woman doing on the stage? And women in law enforcement is kind of a touchy subject with me to begin with. I'm outraged and appalled at some of the right-wing influencers that have a problem with women in law enforcement because basically all they do is exactly what I'm doing, turn on a camera and talk for a living. They don't necessarily have the balls to go out and be a law enforcement officer like some of the women that they're talking about. And they automatically equate being a woman with being weak. And I'll tell you, I'm coming from a place of love because my wife is a woman law enforcement officer. And I go to battle with her any day, probably over 85 to 90% of the dudes that I worked with, by the way. That's long in my history because I'm retired now, thank God. So we all laud President Trump for his leadership and for his will. When he got shot in the ear, he stood up and he fought with those agents to say, just give me a minute with the people. His connection is with the people. And he's saying, give me a minute with the people. And he's telling them, fight. You fight. So he's thinking, man, am I about to die here or what? But his last dying words to the American public would have been, fight. You fight, right? So we look to him for his leadership and we look to him for all these other things. I don't care if you're going to vote for Joe Biden. Well, I was always with Trump. I was always going to vote with Trump. Oh, I support Donald Trump, and you're going to know about it now. You've turned me into the obnoxious Donald Trump supporter, basically. You've talked about leadership and his grit, and he's telling you fight, fight, fight. And what was the first thing that Donald Trump did when he tweeted? The first opportunity he had to get behind a keyboard, I don't know if it was him or his communications director or whatever. The first thing he said was, I want to thank the Secret Service and local law enforcement for their reaction to this whole thing. That's the first thing he did. What's the first thing that these right-wing influencers that are supposedly following his leadership did? They blame the Secret Service and the cops. And I know that there are answers to be had, and I know that there are questions to be asked. And that's normal. We obviously definitely need to do a deep dive into everything that went wrong, but a lot went right in that. And the fact of the matter is, President Trump is still alive. There was a lot of bravery I saw on that stage. I think the snipers acted quickly and appropriately, and I'll tell you why in a second. And one other man in that, what I understand, he was a fire chief, also was taken from us. But the gunman did that. And I do understand that there's a prevention aspect to the Secret Service, like it's a zero-sum game that you can't let anything like this happen, but you're talking about human beings. I do believe that people expect miracles. I think that you underestimate how much local law enforcement is relied upon in these situations. When I tell you I was on a Secret Service task force, don't get it confused. I was not part of the protective element of any president or I'm not trying to be grandiose and telling you any of that. I was on a financial investigative strike team, but in my position at the Secret Service, I served as the liaison between the Secret Service and my agency, which was a large agency. Back in that era, it was probably about 2,500 cops. And anytime there was a dignitary protective event, such as a president visiting, vice president visiting, former president, former vice president, family member, the Secret Service had the obligation, the field office of Tampa had the obligation to protect that person that was coming into town, and they had to coordinate with their local law enforcement partners, my agency being one, the Tampa Police Department being another, and then the Florida Highway Patrol and everything else. So I think people really underestimate how much reliance there is on local law enforcement. So just keep that in mind when you're in Butler County, Pennsylvania, when you're in small town PA, and also keep that in mind when you're in a swing state like Florida, right? We're at the western end of the famed I-4 corridor. Keep that in mind when you're in a swing state like Pennsylvania, how overworked you're going to be in an election season. Every candidate's trying to get out there. Every candidate's surrogate is trying to get out there, and some of them are protectees. So when you're relying on local law enforcement to do a majority of your security, things are going to happen. Because it's not standardized. There are standard things that the Secret Service does, and that will never well, it'll probably change after this, but there are standard things that they do. But amongst them, the force multiplier is local law enforcement. And if you don't have enough cops to do these things, you got to work with what you got. And it would be easy to say, well, geez, they should just tap within. They should just pull agents from different areas. They already do that. And they're already spread thin. And I can tell you, in an election season, working with those agents, the bags under their eyes, the bags that are sitting in their office because they're landing from one trip, maybe catching a shower at the office and taking off for another trip, it's a tremendous undertaking. I think people underestimate how worn down these agents get. Now, let's look at the Secret Service structure real quick, too. There's a protective detail that operates out of the Washington field office or in Washington, and they handle the sitting president, and headquarters is there also. So they're mainly responsible. They're going to know first, when there's a visit. And then they coordinate with each local field office. So the Pittsburgh field office probably was the lead on this. If there is a Pittsburgh field office of the Secret Service, they were probably the lead on this thing. And so the agents there have to pour all their resources and team up with the people out of Washington. Okay? Hopefully if you're with me so far. If you're not, say something. I'm hoping to keep you with me. Anyway, so people think, I think people are under the impression that these activities are somehow reimbursed. So a local law enforcement agency, the only skin a local law enforcement agency has in the game is to not be embarrassed. That's the only skin they have in the game, because they're not going to get any money back from the federal government for the resources that they volunteer for these things. And, having been part of, I'm just going to estimate here, 30 some odd motorcades, literally in 30 some odd motorcades. I've been part of the planning of more than that. But don't forget, I'm in a swing state. I was on the Secret Service Task Force during an election season. No less than like 30 motorcades. Do you have any idea how many motorcycles it takes? How many local law enforcement officers it takes? If it's a presidential visit or vice presidential visit, they tend to shut down the streets. They shut down interstates. They determine the routes. They shut down, and they post officers at all these locations. Like, if you're going to be driving, think of, if you're just driving on your local interstate. Here in Tampa, it's 275. And if you're driving on 275, you're just headed northbound. There's no exit on either side of you, but you're crossing over a road. So when you're crossing over that road, there has to be a cop underneath there to make sure that nobody is planting explosive devices, nobody is, doing all this other stuff. So this is, so just keep that in mind. It's very manpower intensive for a visit. This is not an excuse. This is a fact. Okay? And there is nothing in the way of the reimbursement for any of this. So when you talk about having 15 motor units from our agency dedicated 14 or 15 hours on what's supposed to be their day off, that's straight overtime for those guys. Now, there's ways around that, but think about that. So these are manpower intensive, and not every agency has the manpower to throw at this stuff. So what they do is they rely on state officers and, like highway patrol or state police or all of that. So with that being said, when you think about it, you got Secret Service who's there with the protective detail itself out of Washington. You have Secret Service from the local field office. Then you have like 4 or 5 agencies involved, local law enforcement agencies. How many radio frequencies do you think that they're on? Because they're not on one, they're all on their own. So what that creates is the need for a command post or a radio room. There's a ton of medical assets like EMS, fire trucks, all kinds of stuff that are generally part of the motorcade. So they're all sitting. Generally, anybody that's out there at the protective event that has a gun and a badge or has some kind of medical role and has a radio, they have a representative in the radio room because it's a central repository. You talk to the people in the command post tell everybody else in the room. Okay? This could account for the delay of the sniper, in my opinion. Because if those witnesses, like you saw the guy with the red hair, the BBC interview, if he's saying, we're telling the cop, he's right there, we're telling him, hey, there's somebody climbing up that building with a rifle, he may have alerted the Secret Service agent that he's assigned to. He may have alerted other local law enforcement officers. There are elements within the crowd that are dressed in civilian clothing, and they may be, you may not know that they're law enforcement officers, but they're talking on that radio. Well, that communication is going in, it's not going out to everybody that's there, it's going out to the radio room. The radio room has the responsibility of interpreting the information and getting it back out to everybody else, right? So the agent on the roof, and by the way, there's two, there's a counter assault team. There's also the snipers, which are part of the Secret Service uniform division. They're not part of from what I remember, or from what I gather or understand, the Secret Service has Secret Service agents who are considered 1811 federal agents. And then there is this whole Secret Service uniform division. Those are the guys you see at the White House physically with uniforms on. And there's an element within that that is they have snipers and such. Every interaction I've had with our SWAT guys and their interactions with the Secret Service snipers, whether uniform division or not, has always been top-notch. Those guys have always been top-notch trained. They've always, and I've never heard anything to the contrary until yesterday. Okay, and I just want to keep yesterday in perspective. This is not an excuse. This is a fact. There was an attempt on President Reagan's life in 1981. There was with a gun, and he was shot. There was an attempt on President Trump's life yesterday. 43 years apart. That's a pretty damn good track record, if you ask me. And I know the absolute that is involved in this. That you've got one job to do, and that's to protect the guy. But considering the number of events that they do per year, considering the number of protectees, considering the number of the people at those events, this is a pretty good track record. I get that you think I'm crazy. I get that you think that that's a foolish notion. I'm just telling you, these are human beings just like you and me. So if somebody sneezes or looks down, and something isn't the way it was before they sneezed, they may not pick up on it. Okay, I'm not saying that's what happened. So the counter assault team I'm seeing are 1811s, which are agents. So there's a counter assault team, which is like the SWAT team of the protective detail, and then there's the uniform division that has the snipers. Okay, so here we are. We're talking about the amount of work that goes into one of these. The Secret Service. What happens? There's a buzz around the office that there might be a visit coming. Next thing you know, it turns into, he's the president's definitely coming, or the vice president's definitely coming. Somebody that needs protection. And so once they determine when this is, we're talking like maybe 3 weeks out, a month out, there's something called a police meeting that the Secret Service calls the local police chiefs and the local highway patrol and everybody else. We all gather in one big room and we talk about the visit. The Secret Service holds most of the details close to their vest. They obviously have to give dates and times and potential venues because they need to know what jurisdiction stuff is in. So they'll hold this police meeting, and in the police meeting, they'll kind of introduce themselves as like, hey, I'm the liaison from Washington, D.C. If I remember right, and I could be wrong, Dan Bongino was in one or two of the visits that when I was on the Secret Service task force. He was, I remember the guy for some reason. I don't know why. Maybe it's just because I see him on Rumble all the time or whatever. Speaking of Rumble, the Comm Center with Drew Breasy on Rumble, YouTube, subscribe. Go to thecommcenter.com. Okay, look, we had this big police meeting, and in the police meeting, everything is kind of separated at that point. You have the explosive ordnance people over here. You have the traffic people, like the motorcade, meaning people who control traffic over here. You have the intelligence people over here. You have, other security protective people over here. You have people that are going to handle the staff over here. You have the underwater recovery over here because you're going to need a marine unit. You're going to need boats. You're going to need. If there's one thing I can impress upon you, it's the scale of what goes into one of these visits. And I realized that Butler County didn't have all of these things that I'm talking about, but what is common is the personnel involved. So the personnel from the detail has been to 6 or 7 police meetings and 5 or 6 of those visits before they have to go to another police meeting, before they have to go. They're spread thin. They're spread very thin. And it's not necessarily it may be a manpower issue within Secret Service. I don't know. Now, I am hearing things like, the director that maybe Trump's team or somebody from the detail asked for more assets prior to this visit and has been asking and has been denied. That's an upper management thing. And that could account for what happened very easily, because if you have an exposure, if you have a place that's exposed, like this guy was able to climb up on a roof with a rifle, well, that's what you're going to get, So that's an upper management thing, though. That's not an agent on the ground. That's not a local cop thing. They're doing what they can. Okay, so they have this big police meeting. They divide into these separate groups. And then for the next week or so, they're setting up like who's going to stand where. They look at all the vulnerabilities to include all of the rooftops, all of the line of sight issues, all of the windows. These are experts at this. These are the experts at this game. And I can't give you an answer as to why that one rooftop was exposed. I can tell you that it was one rooftop, and on top of that, the guy climbed up here, and he was on the ridge line. He was like, you can even see in the photo, well, I might even have the photo, but you could see in the photo that he's tilted at an angle. So from everybody else's perspective, it wasn't really line of sight, though it was. I'm sure that doesn't make sense, but at any rate, him getting up on that roof, the process worked. People saw him going up. The people notified law enforcement or whoever they notified, because that'll all come out in the investigation. And then what happened from there is reactive. That's all that anybody can ask for. The only proactivity when it comes to like a Secret Service visit would be like the intelligence element receiving specific information about, say that kid. Say that kid, there was specific intelligence that he was putting out information on Facebook about how much he hated Trump and how much he wanted to die and all this other stuff. Well, the intelligence teams would go over and talk to that kid. I've been involved in conversations with people who have had iffy feelings about the person that was coming into town, and they reassured that nothing was going to happen, but there's only so much you could do legally, one. But two, generally, if there's any kind of medical, mental health issue involved, most of the time you can convince them to check themselves in so that they're out of the picture, so to speak, for the visit. You don't have to tell them when the visit is. They're going to know on the news when and where and all that other stuff. And if the threat is big enough or the threat is serious enough, then there's a chance that someone will establish surveillance on that person. So while the visit's going on, there might be somebody from a different agency or a local law enforcement agency specifically watching that house to make sure he doesn't get in the car, to make sure he doesn't drive towards the site. And if he drives towards the site, obviously, the communication process starts from there. Okay, so here we are. We're done with the police meeting. We're now at the planning stages. It's all written out. The plan is sent to all of the agents that are involved. It goes all the way up to Washington, because at this point the full detail is not in town yet. And they look at this thing and they look at the vulnerabilities, the volume of people. By the way, they would come back to me all the time like, hey man, do you think you can get us a mounted unit? These extravagant requests, and somehow we would just wave a magic wand and it would appear. I don't know how small town agencies do it. And what is, I think, underestimated also is that there are some agencies in the Northeast that are very union-based and union-driven, and they're at war with the neighboring jurisdiction. So they don't work well together. So when the Secret Service asks for one asset, they say, go ask them. They're your buddies. And you know what I mean? Like, it's a pain to try to coordinate some of these things when all you're trying to do is protect the guy, the president or the vice president or whatever. Okay, so when you're in a swing state, just bear in mind the number of visits increases, everybody is worn down, assets are spread thin, whether it's local law enforcement, Secret Service, or whatever. Especially when there is a Democrat in charge. And I'm not taking shots. I'm giving you facts and experience. Every protective detail I've ever been involved in at the venue itself, if it's a Democrat, they are free-flowing, show up when they're ready to show up. They have no problem with keeping the streets of Tampa shut down because they're having a cup of tea somewhere. It's just, there's not as much consideration. John Kerry was the worst when it came to that. Barack Obama was kind of behind him. Joe Biden was, when he was vice president, was in a similar situation. If it's a Republican, they are on time or early. And I'm a Republican. I am now a full-fledged Trump supporter because of what happened yesterday specifically. It's just a fact. I was in that same room with George W. Bush, probably 5 days into the Gulf War, and I got my photo taken with him. I was in there with Toby Keith, God rest his soul, and Darryl Worley, and some other people. And I was given like this special perk of having a photo with the president. And I'm telling you, he went down the line. He was very personable. He met all of us. He talked to us for a second or two. He got to the door, and his detail was like, whoa, where are you going? And he turned around, and he was like, well, where's Laura? They said she's going in a separate motorcade. He literally looked at his watch. He looked at them. He tapped his watch, and he flung the door open. and they scrambled to get in front of him because he's like, I gotta go. I got places to be, and I'm not going to hold these people up any longer than necessary. It's a consideration thing. It's much the same as, and you'll hear me out on this, when Trump battled to stand up, all I could think was, and I'm not making a pitch for the election, all I could think was, if this were anyone else, if this were any other candidate, would they have battled to make sure that the public knew that they were all right? In other words, if let's just throw somebody random out there. If it were Bill Clinton, do you think that Bill Clinton would stand up and say, I got to make this connection with the people and let them know I'm okay and that I'm a strong leader? Or do you think he'd be like, we got to get the F out of here? Somebody just shot me. And it's understandable. But it's a Republican and Democrat thing. Anywho, so when they're in control, when the Democrats are in control, things are a little cattywampus when it comes to protective details, which has a ripple effect on the other protective details. One, and two, the rhetoric is out of control. And the rhetoric today is out of control. You had the president of the United States just like 2 or 3 nights ago calling this guy, calling Trump evil, and their whole party line has been, that he's a threat to our democracy. Well, what do you think people are going to do? When you call this guy Hitler, and since you were a kid, the ethical dilemma that you've been proposed is, if you can go back time and take out Hitler, would you do it? This is exactly, when you liken this guy to Hitler, what did you think was going to happen? I mean, I don't know. I do think, by the way, Tucker Carlson made a prediction a long time ago, year and a half. He was like, Joe Biden and Donald Trump will not be the candidates because they're trying to get at Trump. They're probably going to kill him. And Joe Biden is just not going to be the one they put forward. And he's about this far off. So you can call him crazy if you want, whatever. All right. So let me clarify something also. Secret Service, with the task force I was on, they don't pay overtime for protective details. Okay, they pay overtime for financial investigations, and that's what my role was there. It just so happened that I was the liaison between the two agencies, between the Secret Service and my office. Okay, so. I was never obligated to be part of a protective detail, though my agency said, yeah, you are obligated and we're going to pay your overtime. Okay? I hope that makes sense. And I'll tell you, the reason I'm telling you that is because on September 11th, 2001, I was assigned to the U.S. Secret Service Task Force. If you remember where President George W. Bush landed, it was in Sarasota, Florida, which is in the bubble, so to speak, of where Tampa field office would handle the protective detail. I was given the choice on September 10th. Hey, do you want to come along for the ride? Do you want to go down with us? And you can watch how everything goes. Or this other guy in the room, a former detective from Pinellas County, said, or I got a warrant to serve at 6 a.m. on this guy I've been looking for forever, and it's up in what we used to call Suitcase City, and I'm going to go knock on his door at 6 a.m. I could use your help. And I'm like, let's do that. I want to get the arrest. So I could have potentially been in Sarasota on September 11th, 2001. I was not. I did see the aftermath, whatever happened from 10:30 on, and that's a book that I could write. It was sheer chaos. Okay, so the planning, the police meeting, the site surveys, every exit's looked at, every hallway is looked at, every waterway, every bridge, every manhole cover is looked at. People have said in the chat here, which I regrettably can't look down at too often, but people have said they've used city trucks. They'll use snow plows and garbage trucks to cover some of these line of sight issues. That's if it's available. Again, this is manpower and expensive. Somebody's got to drive the garbage truck. Somebody from the city has to make the decision. Yeah, we're going to commit 2 garbage trucks and a snowplow to this situation. And I'm telling you, the only benefit they get out of this is they won't be embarrassed if something bad happens. Okay, that's the only benefit they're going to see out of this. They're not. It's going to cost them a lot of money to have that garbage truck go, and they should do it for the protection of the person that's coming in. It doesn't necessarily mean they're going to, and I guarantee there have been times when they haven't. Okay, so what else here? They use. I don't want to give. I don't want to give away tactics. There was a question in my DMs of like, what's the bubble, or how close do you let someone get? I don't want to talk about that. One, because I don't know for sure, but I kind of know. And two, I'm not going to get into tactics. I'm in contact with a tactical guy that is giving me like so much information about the actual tactics of what happened. What it boils down to with him is this is reactive. It's like anytime you're a sniper, you're reacting to something. So let's talk about that for a second. When there's a guy on the roof who, by the way, is dressed similar to the roof and has a shirt similar to the tree and is on this side of the peak of the roof, and the secrets, the scopes or the binoculars of the Secret Service are looking this way, and he's here. The only thing they'll be able to see is his rifle and probably his head, and it's hard to detect that from that distance, but they do. Obviously, they did. But here's something interesting to think about. So, say there's a lot of chatter on the radio about, hey, there's a guy on a roof, and they're scrambling to try to figure out what roof they're talking about. Then they finally get eyes on this guy. They've got to make a determination as the snipers, or they've got to hear communication that this isn't a local SWAT guy that has climbed up there. Because let's think about this. And it's in the protection of the president, I get. But say Donald Trump is standing up there speaking, and they spot this guy on the roof, and they just bam, 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 start shooting at him. And it turns out that he was a cop. It turns out that he was a 9-year-old kid who climbed up on the roof and nobody saw. It's a big deal when that rifle goes off, okay? And I get that it's an even bigger deal when that guy's rifle fires first, but that does cause a delay. We're talking about human beings here. So they're not in the guy's mind. Nobody's in the guy's mind, by the way, now, but they're not in the guy's mind. They don't know when he's going to shoot. They don't know when he's going to fire his gun. He's just laying on top of the roof waiting to pick the president off. Luckily, the president turned his head, President Trump, that is, turned his head when he did, because the bullet got him here instead of here. Just a very, unfortunate for the people behind him, but a fortunate incident for him. So think about that. Now, when people say, how can he get on the roof? Well, he got on the roof however he got on the roof. Some say that there was a ladder there that was out of place, and they're relying on local law enforcement to say, when you did the protective sweep, and by the way, this site, this building, is out of the area. It's not within the event itself. It's across, it was 450 yards away, a football field and a half. But it was still line of sight. I get it. So as the crow flies, it was 450 yards. But it was also not part of the secure area. So maybe that's an error in judgment. Maybe the secure area should have been a little bit wider than that. But again, it gets back to manpower. How much manpower did you have? How are you able to secure that area? And there could be an argument made that, if it were more secure, you wouldn't need as much manpower. But what they're relying on is the local law enforcement officers or somebody that's in the crowd in plain clothes or whatever to see something abnormal, like, holy shit, there's a ladder there. That wasn't there 20 minutes ago. Or, wait, there's a ladder there that can give somebody roof access. Normally, they would have somebody posted on that. They would have a uniformed officer posted on the ladder if it's affixed to the building anyway. So, again, the process probably worked in the sense that citizens alerted law enforcement likely alerted Secret Service, it went to the radio room, it went back out, and now they have to make a decision. Do we just crush this guy's melon or what? And the guy made the decision for him. Unfortunately, he got his shot off. He just, I guess, missed, and Secret Service doesn't. And thank God. So this is kind of where I'm coming from when it comes to hey, let's I'm always gonna be that way. I'm always going to be protective of the police, not because we get everything right every time. It's because it's assumed that we got everything wrong every time. Okay, I don't even know if that makes sense. Some of the things that I see in the chats here. Strange he was killed by a sniper that obviously was at a vantage point to take the shot, but didn't see him before that. Also, the shooter was shot immediately. Let's think about also, even in the best scope, what somebody at 450 yards looks like. It probably looks like a pebble. So, if he got the shot off and he clocked the guy in the melon, I don't know if I could support that theory. So, he thought it was 130 yards. It was 450 feet, which would be 150 yards, right? Maybe my math's off. At any rate, 130 yards is a football field and a third, if we go with 130, okay? So where are we at? Anybody else have any questions? Just shoot them throw them in the chat. I see that I've missed a lot because of what the way I have to scroll through things and all this other stuff. The setup's not optimal for this. So thank you for being here. Thank you for hearing me out. On game day, it's the Super Bowl for everybody. There's this massive briefing that takes place. So say that event kicked off at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. The briefing likely took place at 8 in the morning. Everybody involved is going to be there. So at about 8 o'clock in the morning, there's this massive briefing. Hey, you all know your assignments. This is the latest intelligence that we've had, and look out for this. And oh, by the way, if you hear this alarm, it really doesn't mean anything. We've already, that kind of thing. So they have this massive briefing, and from the briefing, you don't get to go home and come back. You get to go to your post and lock it down. All right. So when you lock your area down, it's so EOD can do their final sweep. They'll bring the dogs through, they'll bring their detection equipment through and everything else, and that's because the area is locked down. So if the briefing goes from 8 to 9, 8 to 9:30, whatever, you go to your post and you lock it down. You don't leave until you're relieved. Okay, so you're either going to be relieved by a Secret Service agent, by someone from the uniform detail or uniformed services, Secret Services uniform division, or local law enforcement, supplements its own relief or provides its own relief if they're required to. You don't leave. So your area is locked down. So it's done for a few reasons. One, so we can now call it a secure area. I don't know if the outer perimeter, like where that guy was on the roof, was locked down. I don't know if that was considered because it may not have been in the blast radius or whatever reason, whatever calculation is, okay? So there's that. So you don't get to go eat. If you got to go to the bathroom, you got to make sure you get on the radio and have somebody come relieve you and everything. And the whole point is that you can detect when something's out of place if you've been standing there for 4 hours. But the thing is, if this is 9 in the morning and you're standing on the post, as I understood what happened yesterday, and I'm using 1 o'clock as the time that the thing kicked off. I don't know. But if 1 o'clock is the time the rally kicks off, think of the heat. So it's like 95 degrees. You're standing out there with your vest on, your gun belt. You know, as a local cop, you're just pouring in sweat. You're very visible. Even the undercover people in the crowd probably have a vest on underneath, and you know they're communicating and blah blah blah. They have a gun on. Think of the CAT team, the snipers, the counter assault team. They're in place. They've got that heavy vest plate, and they're, you know, it's a tremendous undertaking, and it requires a lot of patience. And so now here you are, all sweaty and agitated, and just wait for this guy to show up. Just imagine when, as I've described other candidates, that they just show up on their own schedule. They just decide, well, we're supposed to be there at 1. It's 2:15. I think maybe we'll start meandering over there. And in the meantime, we've shut down traffic for the entire city. So the entire city is in a quandary, in a logjam. Okay, so there's that. So the motorcade is a huge undertaking also because there's air coverage for that. There's somebody that rides in advance to make sure that the motorcade area is completely shut down before, just to make sure that it's safe for the motorcade to go through. But this motorcade is a huge undertaking. If you've ever witnessed a presidential motorcade or vice presidential motorcade, you'll understand what I'm saying. It's not just 2 limos and a cop car it is like cop car, intelligence car, press van. The press van will probably be in the back, but the detail leaders. Then 1 limo, 2 limos, then another cop car, another intelligence car, another agent, a press van, staffers for the candidate or for the person, like, you know, the president's staff. They travel in a van, you know, or whatever, that's driven by agents. Then there's like an ambulance specifically there. There's some kind of blacked out van which has equipment that none of us really ever knew or understood was in there, and we weren't supposed to ask, so we didn't. And then at the tail end, it's usually the ambulance, but then there's, you know, motorcycles behind it. There's motorcycles in front, motorcycles behind. It is a tremendous undertaking to get that snake to glide down the highway, even if you have shut the whole place down. Just keep that in mind. So there's all that. I think that kind of covers what I'm trying to say about what goes into a U.S. Secret Service visit. This is not just like man, you know, these guys are inept and they just, like, holy shit, I can't believe they left a roof open. And obviously there was a huge mistake made somewhere. And obviously they're going to look into that and get to the bottom of it. But the rhetoric I'm seeing is not leadership quality. It's not like President Trump, who's like, hey, I'm alive because of what the Secret Service did. You know, they crushed that guy's melon within a fraction of a second after he fired the first shot. And I get that he fired the first shot. I understand it. But they crushed that guy's melon pretty soon after. And those people that dove on the stage ready to take a bullet, they did so. And they got him off to safety. And they're making, there are so many of the people, the right, people on the right, the influencers that are making such a big deal about this one female Secret Service agent who couldn't get her gun back into her holster, and she's got no business, and girls have no business being Secret Service agents, and shut up. Literally, I mean, I wish I could curse, but my stepson has been on me about saying bad words. Shut your cake hole. If you're involved in a presidential detail, you've done something in your career. First of all, you've done pretty well, and you've established that you're pretty sharp. 1. 2, if somebody has just shot the president, I think your fine motor skills will be a little off, but at the same time, they still escorted him to safety. That girl that was on stage, that woman, that Secret Service agent woman, that Secret Service agent was a true badass. All right? She covered him. She didn't have the stature the other guys had, but they did what they're trained to do. They all kind of embrace. So you're surrounding the candidate. Somebody put their arm over, hand over to keep his head covered so that, there's no longer line of sight. And they just move this guy as he's fighting. He's telling everybody to fight because he's a stodgy old man. And it's wonderful to see that kind of leadership, but they're trying to get him to safety. And they're literally fighting him to get him to safety. And they're getting ready to go to the stage. You could see the red hat in Trump's hand. And then in the next frame, you see the exact same red hat in her hand. She's basically saying, let me take that from you. And they're trying to get him down the stairs. Look, save all that. Shut your mouth about female cops. Until you become a cop yourself, shut your mouth about female cops. End of story. Look, I'd be more than happy to take anybody's questions. There were 2 questions that I had in the DMs. I told you. One of them was about tactics, and I really don't want to talk about that. The other was about how could they let somebody get on a roof like that. Obviously, there was error. There was human error involved, and it remains to be seen. I don't know much about this suspect or this guy that is thankfully no longer with us. Obviously, he had ill motives. People say he's registered Republican, but he donated to Democrat. Like, none of that matters. He's still a murderer. He tried to commit a murder, and he's dead. He just tried to do it on a high-profile thing. I think the thing that we need to look at is, where do we go from here? People make a lot of noise about RFK not getting Secret Service protection. I don't think he qualified for Secret Service protection. There are waivers, though, and I think that he definitely would fall under the waiver part, having had history in his family of 2 people that were assassinated. I just don't understand why you wouldn't grant the guy protection. It's insane to me. But what's that? Yeah, he's definitely. Somebody's saying that they watched an interview with someone who attended the rally yesterday and another one 4 years ago. He said he noticed a huge difference in the security between this one and the last one he attended. In what way? I'm curious. I know that, and also time of year or it says 4 years ago, so that was an election season also. Because I'm going to tell you now, after the inauguration, or within the next year or 2 later, if you attend that same event in Butler County, PA, it's tight as a drum, and the rhetoric has probably calmed down and all that other stuff. There's just a lot of chaos in election season. There's a ton of chaos. There's no way around it. If you can still hear me, tell me so. Because I tried to accept somebody's request here. Hello? I think I may have lost audio. Oh, okay, I got a thumbs up. Okay, well, I lost the audio in my ears, so I don't know if I'm going to be able to hear anybody if they... Okay, I don't know if I'm going to be able to hear anybody if they join, but I'm just going to wrap it up for now. I'll do a full YouTube video on my channel. I'll probably put it on the Comm Center's channel. Please do me a favor. Go to thecommcenter.com, and all of our information is on there. All of our socials are on there. I would love for you to join and follow us. Maybe not for my Secret Service insight, but you know what I'm saying. Follow the podcast, listen to the podcast. My partner, John, is a wealth of knowledge when it comes to being a 911 professional, and I just want to see you there. And you can now become a member. You can now become a member on YouTube of the Comm Center. Follow me here, though. What Say Drew. I have a YouTube channel, What Say Drew. I haven't used it in forever. I may dust it off soon and start doing more commentaries like this. Who knows? But I appreciate you hearing me out. I appreciate you listening. The 8 of you that stuck around, one being my wife. Thank you for being here. You can always DM me. I will definitely, I'll consider doing another live this afternoon even. So, till then, take care of each other. Let's put the political BS aside. If you're fired up because you're part of the base, stay fired up. That's fine. But we don't need to be out here killing each other. It's just my opinion. Until then, I am Drew Breasy. What Say Drew on Instagram, co-host of the Com Center podcast, and I'm entitled to my opinion.